Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, as you guys can see by the title and the stuff behind me, I am going to be canning up all of the tomatoes that we grew in the garden this year, and I thought that I would film it for you guys. I have been wanting to get all of these tomatoes canned up for months now, ever since they started coming in. Unfortunately, my garden wasn't super prolific this year, so we didn't get quite as many tomatoes as I was hoping, but we still got quite a few. I got some jumbo bags that I've had in the freezer downstairs, so I'm really excited to get those turned into sauce. So today I'm gonna be making a homemade spaghetti sauce and then canning it up in the pressure canner. I'm also going to be making some tomato juice, just whatever I sieve off of the top of the tomato sauce as it's boiling down. Now the recipe that I'm following for today, actually I better get it out and show you. I'm actually taking the recipe that I'm following out of here and I'm actually altering it just a little bit. The tomato sauce recipe that's in here for spaghetti, it's like a seasoned marinara sauce is what it's called. It doesn't have enough sugar in it. It says a teaspoon of sugar. It's not enough. So I actually went online and I found a couple of different recipes for spaghetti sauce. Now I am altering the recipe in here by adding more sugar. That's the only thing I'm changing. However, if you are going to do that, it messes with the acidity. So I am not water bath canning my spaghetti sauce. I'm pressure canning it because I am altering the acidity. I'm still using citric acid to make sure that it's completely acidic and it's safe to completely pressure can and eat and everything. But anytime you alter a recipe, it always says not to if you're water bath canning, because you cannot mess with that tomato acidity in the jars, which makes it safe from botulism, mold, or anything like that, or it fermenting. So I'm actually going to be following this recipe, but adding more sugar. So I'm not water bath canning. I'm going to be pressure canning it. I'm also going to be pressure canning the tomato juice that we take off the top as well. I'm going to show you guys all of that in this video. Now, I actually did forget to film me laying out my bags of tomatoes from the garden and thawing them. You guys have seen me harvest vegetables this year on this channel. I forgot to film the thawing process. So unfortunately, where these videos cut in is me having them in the pot and starting to boil them down. That's where I started filming. So hope you guys enjoy watching this tomato canning video. I'll see you guys when I'm done.
So the first thing that you want to do after you've thawed all of your tomatoes is dump them into the biggest pot that you have, and then you're going to let them boil. You're going to want to boil because you want to cook out as much of the liquid as possible. Now, something that you can do if you don't want all of that liquid and juice to be wasted via evaporation from boiling, you can very carefully strain out the liquid into a sieve, into your jars, obviously clean boiled jars, so that you can actually can up tomato juice. You would use tomato juice in anything that you would want to make, any Mexican dishes. You can use it for Spanish rice. You can use it for Toasty Locos. I love putting V8 Splash, which is also basically tomato juice, in Toasty Locos when I'm making authentic Mexican street food. You can actually use this canned up juice. It would work exactly the same as V8, and you can use it for lots of Spanish dishes, and you can also add it to soups and stews. There's just a lot of different uses for tomato juice. So if you don't want to waste it via evaporation, you can do what I'm doing here and you can just strain it. And that is what I did, and I actually got a lot of jars of tomato juice for future uses. Once you have all of your tomato juice or tomato sauce in your jars, your clean boiled jars, you're going to want to add in any canning salt or citric acid at this point to make sure that your acidity is good enough for water bath canning or pressure canning, depending on which method of preserving you're doing. I'm doing pressure canning, but I am adding 1/4 of a teaspoon of citric acid and 1/2 teaspoon of canning or pickling salt. I do this with all of my tomato products because I want to make sure that they can and they don't get botulism or ferment or anything like that. That would be really, really bad. So you want to make sure that you take care of that. And then also I'm putting on a new clean rim, and then I'll put on a lid. And I did this for all of my jars of tomato juice. The next thing I'm going to do is add some extra virgin olive oil to a stainless steel skillet. I am going to be prepping the onions for my spaghetti sauce. Now, if you're water bath canning, obviously follow whatever recipe you are using for your spaghetti sauce. Use the exact amount of onion it calls for. Don't mess with it because onions do affect the acidity of whatever you're water bath canning, whatever sauce you're canning, or salsa, things like that. but I'm pressure canning, so I did follow the recipe. I believe this was 4 or 5 medium to small sweet onions, and I believe the recipe called for 2 cups of onions, which this was probably a little more, honestly, but I am pressure canning, not water bath canning, so I'm not worried about that. And I do add citric acid and everything, so it's all good. But I'm gonna saute these onions and cook them down. I'm not caramelizing. I'm just gonna cook them down until they are translucent, and then I'm going to add them into my spaghetti sauce. All right, now that my onions are done and setting aside, I'm going in with an immersion blender and I'm blending up all of these tomatoes that I have been boiling and simmering for a couple hours. Obviously, I scooped out a majority of the juice because I didn't want to waste it via evaporation. I really wanted that tomato juice to have. However, if you didn't, you may need to let yours simmer for up to 4 hours, maybe even, or let it boil just to make sure that the liquid is really, really out so that you don't have a watery tomato sauce. You do want it to be pretty thick, like a Prego or any other type of spaghetti sauce. But since I scooped so much out, mine is ready for blending. So I'm just using an immersion blender and making sure that this gets all the lumps out and all the clumps out, and that it's a smooth sauce so that I can add in my onions and all of my seasonings and things and make this a really, really good spaghetti sauce. So now that the sauce is completely immersion blended and there's no lumps or clumps or anything, I'm now adding in those sauteed onions that we did earlier. I'm not gonna obviously immersion blend this again because I like the onion chunks and I don't want to puree the onions, that's gross. So I'm just adding this in now. Now it's time to add in all of our yummy spices. That's really going to give this tomato sauce a lot of flavor and turn it into a nice marinara spaghetti sauce. I added in Italian seasonings, basil, onion powder, garlic powder, salt, pepper, and probably a few other things, but I went really heavy on the spices. Now I'm adding in my sugar. Sugar is a must in any spaghetti sauce. I've been making spaghetti sauce for a few years now with my garden tomatoes, and sugar it's make or break. You really can add as much as your heart desires. How sweet do you like your spaghetti sauce? I prefer mine pretty sweet just to break up the acidity from the tomatoes, but that's because I'm pressure canning, so I can add more. This tomato sauce is just coming together so nicely. It's absolutely beautiful. You can see there are some chunky thickness to it, but not like anything crazy. I think there's a piece of garlic here that I'm removing that didn't get broken down, but this is absolutely delicious. It was smelling so good and it's coming together really, really nicely. And this is the consistency that I like my spaghetti sauce. I like chunks of garlic and onion and spices, but I like the tomatoes to be super pureed. Now that our spaghetti sauce is perfect and done to the consistency that we like, you can see I skimmed off a lot of that tomato juice in the back, and I have all that jarred up as well, and we're going to be pressure canning that with the sauce. We are going to go on and fill up our pint jars and leave a 1-inch head space at the top of the neck. So you can see I'm just doing that here. This is how we like our spaghetti sauce. It's honestly pretty thick, but it's not watery, and that's just how we like it. Once I get these jars filled up, I am going to be adding in the citric acid and also the canning or pickling salt to each jar, and then we're going to pressure can. Now, obviously, if you followed the recipe perfectly and you didn't alter the onions, the garlic, or the sugar amount at all, you could water bath can this, but because I did alter the recipe to my taste and my liking, I am going to be pressure canning today. Now it is time to add in our citric acid to each jar. I'm using pint jars, so it is 1/4 teaspoon of citric acid to each jar of sauce. And then after the citric acid, we are going to go in and add in our pickling salt as well, which is 1/2 teaspoon to each jar. This just ensures that the acidity is exactly where it needs to be and there won't be any fermenting or botulism risk or anything like that. And it's just going to make sure that this is safe sauce to jar. And I'm pressure canning it, so I have no doubts it's going to be perfect. But this is just an added measure to make sure that it's safe. After you've added in any salt or citric acid that you need to add for your sauce, I'm just going in wiping all of the rims to make sure there's no tomato juice or remnants or spices or anything that is dirtying up the rims so that the lids stick and they pressure can really well to the jars so that we have a really good seal rate. Then we're going to go in and add in all of our lids and rims onto the jars, and we are going to tighten them until fingertip tight, not too tight because you do want the air to be able to escape the jars for the pressure canning process, but you also don't want them to like fly off, because if you make them too loose, they will be loose in the canner, and you need them to be just tight enough. So fingertip tight it is. So now that the jars are all done and prepped, we got to prep the canner to get ready for canning. So you can see my canner is empty, and we're going to go on and add in a base bottom. These come with your canner. I have 2 of them so that I can do 2 levels because I have a double tall canner. So we're going to add that in now so that the jars aren't on the bottom. Next, I'm adding water into the canner because you have to have water in there for it to pressure can, because you have to bring it up to a boil. So I'm adding the water in now. I'm adding the amount that my canner calls for. Obviously, you'll have to go by the canner that you have. The next thing I do is add about a tablespoon or 2 of white vinegar. This makes sure that there's no watermarks and residue all over your canner and on your jars. It just kind of keeps it clean in there. So that's a little step that I take. And now it is time to add in our jars. You can see here I'm adding in 1 jar at a time into the hot water. Now these jars are hot or warm from where we put hot sauce into them, and then the jars were hot when I hot packed them. You want all of the temperature to be as close as possible so you don't have any jars break or shatter. That's really important. And then you also want your jars to be spaced out. Like you can see here, none of the glass is touching because these things rattle. Whenever it's pressure canning, the pressure is so strong, your jars can rattle and they can clank each other if they're touching, and you can have breakage, and that's really bad because this is a lot of work and you want your jars to all seal properly and not shatter and break. Here I'm adding in a second level so that I can basically do 2 loads in this canner. I'm adding the tomato juice to the top, and I'm just doing that on the second rack at the top of my canner. Now, if you only have a single level canner, you won't be able to fit as many jars as I'm doing here, but I have a large canner. I bought it on purpose so that I could do bigger loads at a time, and honestly, it was the best decision because I have huge loads and it saves me a lot of time. Now I'm just making sure to seal the lid on top of my canner really tight so the pressure can build. Now that the steam has been coming out of the hole for 10 minutes, we can add our weight, and then we will watch the gauge reach 11 pounds of pressure, and then we will be able to start the time on our canning process for our spaghetti sauce and our tomato juice. So I am just checking with my canning book that came with my canner. For spaghetti without meat, it is 11 pounds of pressure for 20 minutes of processing time. And then for tomato juice, it is also 11 pounds of pressure, but for 15 minutes. So I am able to process my tomato juice with my spaghetti sauce at the same time, and we will just process it longer at the 20-minute time mark so that it's all processed and the spaghetti sauce is processed for the proper amount of time. And it's okay to process a little longer. It's not going to hurt it. You just don't want to process it for less. Alright guys, that is it for this canning video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and I hope you learned something about canning spaghetti sauce. I ended up getting 8 jars of spaghetti sauce and 6 jars of tomato juice. I feel really good about that. We also use these products in a future video coming up very soon. Can't wait to show you guys that. Hope you guys enjoyed. I will see you guys next time. Be kind. Bye.